Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to IPK, NYU's Virtual Institute for Public Knowledge for co-opting AI trade. We're just gonna wait a little bit before we start, so everybody has a little bit of time to settle in, put your feet up. Hopefully you have a beverage of your choice in your hand and can kick back and relax after this first day after Labor Day, which is the day when, at least in the United States, everything kind of really kicks off in the academic world. If you were in the real space, and hopefully we will be able to convene fully in person very soon, you would be browsing the buffet and getting a drink and catching up with friends who you probably haven't seen or colleagues in a very time. Right, just gonna give it another couple of seconds before we start. Okay, all right. Hello, everybody. And again, welcome to our first co-opting AI event in the fall 2022 program. I hope all of you had a rejuvenating and very relaxing summer and are back with full strength and excitement for the rest of the year. My name is Dr. Mona Sloan. I am a sociologist at New York University and also at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and I study the intersection of technology, design, and society. I'm a fellow here at the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University, where I have been convening the Co-opting AI series since early 2019. I want to acknowledge that the series would not be possible without the very generous support and the sponsorship of the Institute for Public Knowledge, Eric Kleinenberg and Jessica Coffey, of course, as well as Santa John, as well as the 370J project in Brooklyn, and of course, the Department of Technology, Culture, and Society at NYU Tandon. Thank you so much for your ongoing support of the series. I also want to proudly say that this is the 33rd event since we started co-opting AI. This one is dedicated to a social phenomenon that over and over again grips geopolitics and, more recently, especially for those in Europe, our everyday lives, which is trade. Now, before we begin our conversation, I want to acknowledge that I am standing on the unceded land of the Lenape peoples, and I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Lenape community and the indigenous communities on whose land you may be located, and to commit to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Now, algorithmic technologies have an intimate relationship to trade. After all, much of what we buy and perhaps sell today is powered by computational systems that help us optimize for efficiency, for speed, for quality, for taste, for delivery time, and for price. Financial trading specifically, which is the focus of today's co-opting AI event, has always had a tendency to go in tandem with technological innovation. For example, the laying of the first transatlantic cable in the late 19th century enabled the first electronic fund transfer system via telegraph communication and Morse code. Today, financial trading has massively accelerated, which is aided by computer technology. Generally, algorithmic systems are used more and more to automate or semi-automate trade. High-frequency trading, which is what some of our guests today will be focusing on. In high-frequency trading, machines process bits and orders and send them out to other machines at an extraordinary speed, at about 64 millionth of a second. It's hard to imagine. This brings about new questions around transparency and regulation, of course, especially after the 2008 financial crisis and the increasing scrutinies vendors of algorithmic systems are under across all kinds of sectors, which I'm sure some of you are following very closely. But it also, and I would say that as a sociologist trained in cultural studies, prompts new questions about the cultural aspects of financial trading. What cultural patterns grow out of these new and rapidly changing socio-technical systems? Patterns of, for example, making distinctions that underpin human or non-human decision-making. These questions are not just questions about human agency, as philosophers and computer scientists concerned with AI often like to focus on, but on ongoing shifts in meaning making that are bound by the physical properties of a technical system. In fact, high-frequency trading crudely surfaces the significance of materiality of computational systems. Financial markets are enrolled in the so-called speed arms race, which I recently learned about, whereby the material properties of HFT, which is high-frequency trading, are optimized to decrease systems latency. And this materiality, of course, is big business in itself. The global high-frequency trading server market size is expected to reach $501 million by 2028. And processor technology is expected to significantly improve as well, a topic which, again, I'm sure many of you know, has yet again become a matter of geopolitical significance with the recent signing of the US CHIPS Act by President Biden. Today's Co-opting AI event on trade will examine these complex dynamics and explore the intersection of algorithmic technologies, the professional practice of financial trading, and the social construction of markets. I am grateful and really truly honored to host two experts in the field whose research continually provides important insight in the intersection of technology and financial trading. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Donald Mckenzie and Deniz Çoral. Donald Mckenzie is a sociologist of science and technology at Edinburgh University. He researches the material foundations of economic activities, such as financial trading and online advertising. And his most recent book is Trading at the Speed of Light: How Ultra-Fast Algorithms Are Transforming Financial Markets, out with Princeton University Press. I'm having it in my hand, which you can see because the screen is blurred, but out with Princeton 2021, a terrific book. Other books he has written include Inventing Accuracy, a historical sociology of nuclear missile guidance, and An Engine, Not a Camera: How Financial Models Shape Markets, which was out with MIT Press in 2006. Also joining us today is Deniz Çoral, who is an advanced doctoral candidate in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Minnesota. She is currently finishing her dissertation, where she takes affect as constitutive of, as well as a key methodology for analyzing everyday practices of proprietary trading and expertise at the nexus of market and state structures in the aftermath of the failed military coup in 2016 in Turkey. Welcome both. Thank you so much for joining us today. Allow me to add just a few words in housekeeping. As per usual, we will hear from our panelists, each have about 10 to 12 minutes to present their provocation. Meanwhile, please feel free to pop questions or comments into the Q&A section in the Zoom webinar. After our panelists close their presentations, we'll have a brief panel discussion, and then we'll open for Q&A. We have closed captions available today. You just have to click that. It is enabled in the Zoom, and we will end at about 6:15. And with that, it is my honor and pleasure to hand over the baton to Donald. Thank you so much for being here, both.
Well, thank you, Mona, and thank you for that terrific introduction to our topic. This is a kind of materiality is a kind of visual thing, so I'm going to be showing you some pictures as I talk. Yeah. So Mona's already kind of said what high frequency trading is: automated, ultra fast, huge numbers of trades, so typically individually small. And to save time, I've just put the argument I'm making on the screen. The first sentence of it, the cheapness of electronic trading, I mean, that is not actually a result of my research. I mean, I'm just picking that up from the literature. And it's not at all surprising that electronic trading is cheaper than human, especially when you think the very large salaries, bonuses that human traders and banks, for example, can command. High frequency trading is a sort of subset of electronic trading. And what's perhaps most interesting and most distinctive about it from my viewpoint are indeed the speed races that Mona's already mentioned, and the time-space dynamics that those speed races create. So my first picture is of a silicon chip, a so-called field programmable gate array, and that's the hardware device of choice in high-frequency trading. Just to give you a little sense of time-space dynamics on this micro scale, an execution, a computer execution in an FPGA of state-of-the-art speed, it kind of has to get done in something like 4 nanoseconds. That's 4 billionths of a second. Now, that silicon chip, it's kind of big as silicon chips go, but it's still a pretty small piece of silicon. And at that kind of speed, the designers of FPGAs have to spend quite a lot of time thinking about real estate on the silicon chip and how long a signal is going to take to get from one point to another point. I don't generally ask my interviewees about their opinions of speed races, but here interviewee UC, which is clearly a made up label, the person whose hands are holding that printed circuit board talks about it being mind-numbing, the extent of human ingenuity that goes into shaving nanoseconds. So that's time-space dynamics on a microscopic scale. What I'm mostly going to be talking about, partly because, to be honest, it's easier to get your head around it, is time-space dynamics on a more macro scale. Where do speed races come from? Well, they come from the fact, I'm talking in an Institute of Public Knowledge. Public knowledge, slightly different sense of that, of the term public knowledge, is what practitioners of a field such as high frequency trading all know, and all know that they all know. So machine learning is certainly used in HFT, but in a sense, the structure within which it operates includes simpler signals, often detected and detectable by human beings just on computer screens. One of these is a signal that I call futures lead. Financial futures in the United States are nearly all traded in a data center in the western suburbs of Chicago, run by the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Shares in the United States are almost all traded in 4 data centers in northern New Jersey. And for reasons which I'm happy to discuss in the Q&A, but I'll not take the time to explain here in the little introductory talk, prices in Chicago move typically a tiny fraction of a second before the prices of the underlying shares. So if you're an algorithm trading shares in New Jersey, getting the knowledge as fast as possible from what's happening in Chicago is vital. You need to know it. Everybody needs to know it. Everybody knows that everybody needs to know it. These speed races are utterly routine events. There's only one really good quantitative study of them by Aquilina, Budish, and O'Neill, published earlier this year in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, based on data from the London Stock Exchange of 2015, approximately one race per minute on average in each of the leading stocks, the FTSE 100 stocks traded in London. And in 2015, those races would last for 5 to 10 microseconds, 5 to 10 millionths of a second. But hey, 2015 is a long time ago, and the speed of races has got much faster. The most recent piece of data I have comes from the European Futures Exchange, Eurex, and their high precision timestamp file suggests that the fastest HFT algorithms can react within 15 nanoseconds, 15 billionths of a second. And that, for example, makes fiber optic cable a disastrously slow communication mechanism, because the glass of the core of a fiber optic cable slows light down to approximately only 2/3 of its speed in a vacuum. And of course, that's what Einstein postulates is the fastest physically possible speed of light in a vacuum. Send your signal through the atmosphere, though, and you're almost at Einstein's limit. So the kind of kit you want to use, you can see a little bit of it here, is a microwave dish. If your eyes are very good, you might be able to see blue in the middle background, and that's a lake. So you'll remember my previous picture, the so-called geodesics, the Great Circle route from Chicago to northern New Jersey, carrying the signals crucial to global finance, crosses Lake Michigan and Lake Erie. That's almost certainly Lake Michigan in the background of the picture. How long is a nanosecond? How long is a billionth of a second? There's a sense in which it is this long. My fingers are approximately 30 centimeters or a foot apart. Light in a vacuum travels only this distance in a nanosecond. That's how fast. That's how fast time goes in high frequency trading. This is a meaningful amount of time. And because nanoseconds count, and because this is a nanosecond as laid out in space, then precise spatial location matters exquisitely. My picture here, taken from the French photographers Bird and Renault, is of microwave dishes on towers outside one of the trading data centers. But wait a minute, outside the data center, that means there's what's called fiber tail. There's 100 meters or so of slow fiber optic cable connecting those dishes to the machines inside the data center. And in a certain sense, that's not good enough. You want to be here. You want to be on the roof of the data center, because that can save you approximately a microsecond. Okay, a microsecond's a millionth of a second. It doesn't really sound worth saving a microsecond, but think the other way around. A microsecond is 1,000 nanoseconds. 1,000 nanoseconds. That's kind of a lifetime in the world of high frequency trading. So you want to be on the roof, and indeed it matters where precisely you are on the roof, because you want to be close to one of the points where you can run cable directly from the roof down to the machines in the data center below. The speed race in microwave is in a kind of Red Queen equilibrium. And of course, that's a reference to the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland. It's a reference to running as fast as you can to remain in the same space. At the very core of global financial trading, there's a Red Queen equilibrium between three firms that specialize in the fastest microwave links. Two of them, Newline and Vigilant, are owned by high frequency trading firms. The third, McKay Brothers, rents out bandwidth on its microwave links to other firms. So that stops the field kind of simply collapsing into a tiny oligopoly. So that's always an ever-present possibility. Similarly, actually within data centers, the owners of the main financial data centers do try to maintain some kind of fairness among the high frequency trading firms, who are of course paying very high fees to get their kit into the data center. And they do it by a sort of delightfully old-fashioned physical mechanism. That's to say that if your computer servers are physically close to the exchange's system, then the fiber optic cable that connects them is coiled. So you have the same length of fiber optic cable as somebody who is further towards the edge of the building. So there's a kind of, as I say, a kind of rough equilibrium there, maintained by physical means. But it's all going to change. And this is a development since the book. It's a development I haven't yet been able to talk to people in the field in any detail about, so I can only be really rather tentative about it. But it suddenly became apparent in November when Google invested $1 billion in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And remember, its data center is in a certain sense the spatial heart of the global financial system. And part of the deal is that the Chicago Mercantile Exchange's systems are going to be moved by Google into the cloud, and Amazon is going to do a similar thing for NASDAQ, in a certain sense, the key share trading venue. But as one high frequency trader plaintively said, there are no microwaves in the cloud. So how this fragile physical equilibrium of the current world of ultra fast trading is going to be maintained in the shift to the cloud, whether it's going to be maintained in the shift to the cloud, is going to be something that is going to be fascinating to watch over the coming decade. It's going to be a decade of subterranean, but probably quite intense struggle about the material configuration of the world of trading. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donald, for this fascinating insight. And I want to hand over to Deniz, please.
Thank you for having me today. It was really an interesting talk and definitely gave a lot of things to think about. So thank you for the presentation, Donald. My dissertation research, which Mona talked about a little, makes two propositions. First, the proper functioning of market technologies and infrastructures, such as financial models and algorithms, is contingent upon political, legal, and institutional structures. Turkish financial markets, which my research focuses on, were establishing such structures in the 2000s, considering that they are, so to say, younger than other global financial hubs, such as Wall Street and London. However, the failed military coup in July 2016 changed everything. The Turkish government was already on its way to becoming authoritarian, especially after the Gezi uprising in 2013. But the failed coup made everything worse. To regain its hegemony, the government started exerting political pressures on almost everyone, generating this climate of paranoia and fear. The Turkish finance industry also took its share. For instance, the Banking Regulation and Supervision Agency brought a lawsuit against two Bloomberg journalists with the accusation of undermining the stability of Turkish economy. An economist got fired and kind of implicitly banned from working for a financial institution in Turkey because he made a statement about the role of the Turkish government in the declining conditions of the economy. Moreover, the Turkish president started intervening in the monetary policies of the Turkish Central Bank. He has this ideological stance of reducing the interest rates. As a result, in Douglas Holmes' words, the central bank lost its performative power. Turkey is also undergoing a serious debt and currency crisis. In 4 years, the Turkish lira lost more than 80% of its value against the US dollar. The political instabilities and interventions undermine the Turkish economy, but we are also dealing with corruption. Last week, we learned that the former chief of the Capital Markets Board of Turkey, which regulates and supervises the securities markets, had accepted bribes from business people. Now, I'm not saying that Turkish markets before the coup attempt or financial markets in general are perfect. However, this precarious context eliminates the constructedness of markets. For instance, a derivative trader told me that financial models didn't work in Turkish markets anymore. He then made this drawing when I asked about his perception of the influence of Turkish markets in global financial networks. Tolga, the derivatives trader, explained that if this larger circle here is the world of finance, Turkish financial markets have two parts, indexed with TR here. One part of Turkish markets is a part of this world, the world of finance, since Turkey is an open economy and it is immersed in neoliberal logics of finance capitalism. However, there's another part of Turkish markets, which Tolga called the satellite, that is outside of the world, and it doesn't function according to the rules, models, and algorithms of global finance. This drawing leads me to my second proposition. Traders' engagements with market technologies are not simply between an unmarked user and a replicable conventionalized technologies. Rather, these engagements are entangled with other humans, technologies, and conditions. So if this is the case, I ask, how do traders trade if financial models do not function properly? And what aspects of trading do Turkish financial markets highlight? The aspects that are generally taken for granted or excluded from social scientific analysis of the black box of finance. One aspect of trading that I want to highlight today is how the visualization of financial markets on trading screens through algorithms, trading platforms, interfaces, and charts generate senses and sensibilities, or what Caitlin Zaloom defines as sensorscapes of financial trading. Of course, as Zaloom argues, screen-based technologies changed the sensorscapes of trading completely, right? While financial trading was based on these face-to-face interactions, gestures, and mimics, now trading is highly digitalized and seem to be abstracted from any kind of like social relationships or encounters. Therefore, when we think about the incorporation of algorithms into the construction of financial markets, we can suggest, for instance, the disappearance of the sensorscapes as the machines have taken over the world. However, in line with my second proposition, I suggest that even though traders use the same market data and infrastructures, their interpretations of numeric and visual representations of markets evoke distinct memories, senses, and intuition, leading traders to have unique ways of making sense of the markets and finding trading opportunities. To depict the second proposition, I made this drawing while observing the traders on the trading floor. Here, the market with a capital M is everything a financial market can be, with diverse potentialities, opportunities, manifestations, and movements. The trading desks, which is these large ellipses in the middle, host traders and their screens, the smaller and bolder ellipses within this large ellipses. Traders' different interpretations of the market with a capital M produce what I call singular market images, which are the shapes, these different shapes within the rectangle at the bottom. These singular market images are, of course, are a product of market infrastructures. They are also a product of traders' calculative agency. Although the models don't work in Turkish markets, they are still the basis of trading and calculations. However, these singular images also go beyond market infrastructures and traders' calculative agency. They become entangled with something else, something subjective, embodied, corporeal, and expressive. So when we discuss the materiality of financial trading, we should also take into account the materiality of the market image or market visualizations, which are intertwined with another materiality, traders' bodies. In order to conceptualize these entangled materialities, I draw from critical film theory. As market visualizations with numbers, colors, and shapes change constantly on trading screens, I argue that they also transform financial trading into a haptic practice. Haptic perception emerges when the sight discovers in itself a specific function of touch. Haptic perception is also different from optic perception. While the optic perception is based on the representational power of the image, haptic perception privileges the material presence of the image, and it is more inclined towards the inexpressible the image expresses, as Laura Marx says. At this point, we can argue that numbers are representations of prices, and prices are representations of exchange values, and that would be true. However, the interpretations of these representations are subjective and differ from, person to person. Therefore, to explore how meaning arises from the image, approaching financial trading through haptic becomes useful. It allows us to delve into the materialities and subjectivities of trading because it creates this emotional and physical involvement with the image. So, for instance, Christian Borsch and others examine the rhythm of high-frequency trading. And there are other works that discuss the aesthetics of algorithms or traders' ignorance or emotional attachments to their algorithms. Haptic, in this regard, frames the recognition of markets. It becomes pivotal for traders' attunements to market visualizations. It directs where traders look on their trading screens, which, for instance, Robert Seifert calls the regime of visual attention. According to him, this regime frames how traders' eyes track market movements on the trading screens. In this regard, a price change attracts traders' attention and gaze. From the perspective of haptic, we can even say that that price change lures traders' gaze, captures it to the extent that traders need to respond to it. Thus, during my research, I tried to follow traders' gazes to make sense of how they make sense of the markets based on their senses and intuition. And I made these drawings. I made these drawings when I was watching a stock exchange trader. His gaze, in a sense, dissects the market with a capital M and takes these small slices that, for instance, a small price change or a change in the trading volume of a particular stock or an introduction of a new market actor onto the stock board. Considering the incorporation of algorithms in trading, we might say that this regime of visual attention is not as important as before. I want to propose two counter-arguments here. First, according to Zafer, a quant who sat next to the derivatives desk, said that his job was to build a roadmap for traders, which, in his words, creates a memory of the future based on the past. So while, again, in his words, he aims to get rid of the human factor, the choice of taking this road or not is on the traders. For example, there were like numerous times when I saw this small notification on trading screens that read, a new trading scenario is created, and traders just ignored it. This brings us to the second counter argument. Algorithms may work and they may work perfectly. However, in Turkish markets, they tend to fail more than they work. So traders constantly check if their algorithms are still functioning properly. Or during rallies, especially in the foreign exchange market, the algorithms may not anticipate the rapid price changes, leading traders to shut down their algorithms that provide price quotations to the markets. And despite how microseconds, and apparently it's not micro but nanoseconds, matter in trading, traders in Turkey often have to pause trading because uncertainties are just too much to anticipate. This happens especially in building short-term market expectations, but again, like thinking long-term has never been the strongest suit of traders, right? I was also curious about if this was a technological issue and asked traders about the infrastructure they use, like interfaces, servers, internet connection, cables, and all those things. They told me that the bank, the investment bank, kept up with current technologies and they had like very strong machines. Nevertheless, the market uncertainties in Turkish markets bypass these very expensive and complicated infrastructures and render them basically useless, even though for a moment. Moreover, as haptic is an engagement based on senses, it evokes memories of trading, memories of other market actors, or memories of political events that had impacted the markets in the past. In other words, while algorithms build future memories, traders carry their memories of the past to the present to make sense of the markets. In a sense, it's a very Proustian aspect of trading. For example, traders often evoke the financial crisis in Turkey in 1994 to comprehend the ongoing debt and currency crisis. So while the markets move on the trading screens, haptic enables traders to move with the markets, which is especially important for traders in Turkey because, again, financial models and algorithms fail to transform market uncertainties into calculable risks. To conclude, technological and epistemological infrastructures of markets, such as like algorithms, models, trading screens, create the world of finance in which traders develop. However, the materiality of financial trading and the materiality of traders' bodies, both of which are embedded in social and political contexts, foster and exceed these market infrastructures. They constitute what is already a significant part of trading, which traders often define as like their intuition or gut feeling, or how they develop market feelings. Therefore, in the algorithmic world of finance, senses and sensibilities are still an indispensable aspect of trading. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Deniz, for this great presentation as well, and for this deep insight into your field. And I always appreciate field notes and drawings on slides as a trained ethnographer myself. Okay, we now have a little bit of time for panel discussion, which means I'm going to kick off with a question. And I want to ask the audience to start putting questions and comments into the Q&A chat that you see at the bottom right in your Zoom window. I'll be collecting those and asking them as we progress with our discussion. Now, One thing that really struck me across both of your provocations or presentations and your terrific observations that you shared with us from your field work was the relationship between professional practice and specifically professional practice as it relates to embodiment, embodied knowledge, sensory aspects, and affect. Dennis, what you just spoke about. And Donald, I know you haven't said the word very much in the presentation, but I know you're very interested in the material politics of these things. And you ended actually with a note on the struggle that awaits us as the world of higher frequency trading and our financial global systems moved onto the cloud, which happens to be a place on Earth. Sorry about that pun. So my question is for both of you, how do you see that relationship of professional practice with a view for embodiment and embodied knowledge vis-a-vis material politics, or material politics as you see them and perceive them specifically in your respective field sites? So the relationship between the two. Donald, maybe you want to start with a response to that.
Yeah. It's an interesting and subtle matter. I mean, the first thing to see, of course, is that the human body is, of course, material. And indeed, if anybody's in any doubt of that, just wait until you have an aging one, and you will not have any doubt on that question. So our bodies are part of the material world. There's a very specific Chicago thing here, which I'm sure Caitlin Zaloom will share, which is that the way trading used to be done in the Chicago futures market was quintessentially embodied. The Chicago trading pits were places of the body. They were haptic, as Deniz nicely puts it. You had to use all your senses, including smell. Traders would tell me how just the changing smell of a pit, because we're talking sweaty bodies in sort of nylonish jackets, and by contrast, the embodiment in electronic trading is boringly similar in many senses to the embodiment of academic work. You could, they have more screens than we do, and perhaps some of the time they're more engaged, but often they're not that engaged, because one of the striking things about financial markets is there's a lot of boredom in financial markets. There are a lot of periods where nothing very much happens. There are a lot of periods, particularly overnight, where you have to struggle and perhaps take some stuff to help you stay awake and so on. The professional practice, as far as I can tell, varies across markets. So if, for example, you trade futures, it's still got a relatively hands-on feel to it. It's embodied in that kind of way. You may be concentrating on the trading of one specific future or a very small number of tightly related futures. If, on the other hand, you're working for one of the major electronic market making firms, like, for example, Virtu in the US, does something like 20% of all the share trading in the United States. I don't know exactly how big Virtu's team at any one point in the trading desk would be, but it might be not more than 10 or 20 people trading several thousand different shares. So you're not very hands-on in that kind of environment. So it really depends who you talk to, what kind of market they're involved in, whether they talk about it. The most extreme thing, as somebody once said, which is not actually said to me, but by my colleague, Juan Pablo Pardeguera, is by a manager in one of these firms. He said, "We don't employ traders, we employ anti-traders." That's to say, people whose job it is to monitor what the algorithm is doing and to press the red stop button if it goes wrong.
I mean, it is interesting because in a sense, I guess the traders in Turkey are both traders and anti-traders, right? Because they both trade and look for if the algorithms has like any problems, if it's still working or not.
Yeah.
But in terms of the relationship between the professional practice and material politics, I also agree with Donald in the sense that this relationship varies across markets and geographies. Of course, a stock exchange market is different than derivatives market or futures market, right? But it also is contingent upon geographical locations and cultures and politics. So I think this is one of the main points that I try to make in my talk, because even though which was one of my propositions, right? Even though they have similar, technologies and infrastructures, those infrastructures or how they comprehend and engage with those infrastructures are embedded in these different contexts, these social and material and political contexts. So my focus was a little bit on the everyday life regarding to how to understand this relationship. And I mean, for instance, your question reminded me what a trader told me. I mean, he was basically complaining about how the trading floor, how hot was the trading floor, because the servers were on the trading floor. It was like a little room at the middle of the floor. So it was like constantly producing heat, and the traders with like ties and jackets and shorts and everything, they were just really, really complaining about the temperature. So these tiny things, even though like they are like very ephemeral, they are like very tiny, maybe they are like very trivial, they have huge impacts on how traders engage with the markets, with the boredom, right, with the heat and everything. And regarding how traders' bodies are also materials, I also want to say that those material bodies are not only individual bodies, they are also collective bodies. Because on the trading floor, even though of course everybody has some kind of different target for profit or whatnot, traders constantly talk to each other and they let each other know what's going on in the markets. Sometimes they decide together what to do with this certain price change or this certain news or something like that. So yeah, I just also wanted to highlight that those material bodies can also be collective, which is kind of counterintuitive when you think about financial trading.
Thank you both for these very thoughtful responses to my question. I have one more question, and then I see that we have some questions trickling in the Q&A. Again, the call to our audience to please put your questions and comments into the Q&A as we're going to move towards that part of the event now. My second question for both of you is about narratives, and specifically around narratives around technological innovation with a focus on algorithms, quote unquote, AI, and so on. And perhaps each of you can respond to the question, what role certain narratives play, perhaps infrastructurally, and that they uphold certain practices, maybe, question mark, in your field sites. In other words, what stories are people telling each other about what they do with technology as technology innovation increasingly is integrated into their professional practice? And perhaps we'll flip it and we'll start with Deniz and then Donald.
So the trading floor where I did my field work, they used algorithms, but high frequency trading was kind of rare. They were still like on the way of building such algorithms. So they had like proto high frequency trading algorithms or infrastructures or something like that. They definitely enjoy having those algorithms, but again, like as I try to say, if those algorithms work or not depend on whether the Turkish political milieu is working or not. So if the Turkish markets had such like very complicated and very like advanced technologies as the Chicago market, maybe we could have made a different discussion. But right now, the political stuff, the social stuff actually is more important than who has algorithms in Turkish markets. But one thing that was interesting to me was that depending on how prices change in terms of speed, the traders were able to differentiate if that market actor, even though it was seemingly a market actor from Turkey, if that market actor were trading for an international bank or not, an international financial institution or not. So that speed that they saw on their trading screens were kind of a signal for them that, okay, there was another market actor, an international, a bigger market actor than they were. So that was interesting to see in terms of how they understand and comprehend with their algorithms as well as algorithms of other financial institutions.
Yeah, probably the most important narrative to bring out, because it's not immediately obvious when you talk about trading. It's something that is attenuated through time. This was stronger when I first started doing field work in this area in 2011-12, and it kind of attenuated by 2019, which was the last real field work before the pandemic shut down the interviewing. Is the narrative of the outsider and the challenger. And that's how many of the original high frequency trading firms and the electronic trading venues on which they traded saw themselves. So that, for example, the single most important trading venue was a share trading venue called Island. And on the website, and the original website of its founder and programmer, Josh Levine, was the slogan "Power to the People." So, and that wasn't, this wasn't fake. This wasn't a flight of fancy. This was an important framing narrative for that kind of venue. And some of the purchase of it, it's very interesting actually even today to notice where high frequency trading takes place and where it does not. So for example, there's plenty high frequency trading of treasuries, of US government bonds, and effectively none of European government bonds. And high frequency traders remain shut out from that market. So the narrative of the outsider and the challenger is important here.
Thank you very much for your response on this narrative question. We have questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with a question from Caitlin Zaloom, who is interested in uncertainty and says that uncertainty is a fascinating aspect in financial trading because it represents those elements that fall outside calculation. And she says Donald's ending on technological evolution, the CME combining with Google and so on, introduces uncertainties for traders. Dennis described how political uncertainties force traders beyond calculation. So Dr. Zaloom's question is, what do these uncertainties create in terms of practice? And maybe both of you can briefly respond to that. Maybe Donald will start with you, and then Deniz will switch over to you.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm unmuted. Yeah. I'm fascinated, as you could tell, by the Google's involvement at the very heart of high frequency trading. In one sense, I want to cop out and just say, well, I'm just going to have to wait, until I've had time to have conversations with actors in the field to see how they see it. But I would, in fact, I would speculate about something. That's to say that if I was a software engineer working for Google, thinking about the issues of the move into the cloud, thinking about the very, very real technological challenges of maintaining equal time intervals and the like, fairness in that kind of sense in the cloud, not the cloud when you're measuring time in seconds or even in milliseconds, but when you're measuring time in nanoseconds. I think if I was a Google software engineer, I'd think, well, let's see if we can find a more elegant solution. Let's not just replicate the world, the sort of physical world of high frequency trading. Let's restructure it. And I would almost certainly be led to the work of Eric Budish, whose name I mentioned, Chicago economist, who is arguing for a shift from continuous trading, where you can trade literally any nanosecond, and in a sense, that's the fundamental cause of the speed race, to discrete auctions, maybe very frequent, perhaps even as frequent as an auction every millisecond, every thousandth of a second. That kind of design seems to me a priori likely to be more easily implementable in the cloud. And that would actually be a giant infrastructural change to the world of financial trading. If you believe Budish's analysis, it would be a change for the better, because it would cut down the waste of social resources that the speed race involves.
I mean, it's a good question. So, for instance, as I said, like the Turkish central bank is basically does not have any power anymore, right? And when I was doing my fieldwork, which was about like in 2018, 2019, traders were still, were careful about the statements of central bank, and they were like building their expectations around, okay, the central bank, let's say, would raise the interest rates. But over and over again, despite their expectations, the central bank didn't raise the interest rates because of the political pressures and oppressions, right? And at the end of the day, they just had to adapt and had to rebuild their expectations on the basis that the central bank wouldn't do the right thing here being the, executing its technocratic knowledge and technocratic authority over the markets. So in that regard, I don't know what future would bring to Turkey as well as Turkish markets. But I mean, at this point, I think all I can say that traders would adapt to how political uncertainties kind of amplify the economic uncertainty. So it doesn't mean that I don't think that they will just like get rid of financial models and like trade as if, I don't know, none of these models or algorithms existed. But I think in terms of how much they depend on the models or how much, let's say, wiggle room that they provide to themselves, provide to their trading would change. But let's see what's going to happen in Turkey.
Thank you both. I'm gonna move to questions that are either for Donald or either for Deniz. So we have one for you, Donald, from Natarajan Krishna Swami, who is asking, or who is stating that you mentioned exchange coiling fiber optic cable to equalize latency among their HFT customers. Has that become widespread among the exchanges now? And if so, what forces, customer pressures, Google and other gorillas preferences, risk of regulation, and so on, do you think were most influential in passing that tipping point? So a question about a very specific scenario here for Donald. You're muted. Donald, you're muted.
Let me see if I've got it right. So the question is about what forces caused exchanges to do stuff like equalize cable lengths. Is that?
Yes.
Yes.
So
okay.
it's about the equalization of latency among HFT customers and whether that's widespread among the exchanges.
Yeah,
and what caused that essentially?
I think in terms of exchanges, it is relatively straightforward, which is anticipated pressure from regulators. I think exchanges felt if they didn't go down this route anyway, they would be forced to go down that route. So they might as well get ahead of the game. And also, of course, it's a matter of keeping your customers happy, because the trading firms are your customers. And if one trading firm has got like a shorter cable, that trading firm will be one happy customer, but the rest of your customers are not going to be happy customers. So it's nothing very exciting about those sort of pressures. That's understandable. What's much more interesting is this tenuous equilibrium among the three firms that are the speed leaders in microwaves, because it's not structural, so to speak. There's nothing external holding this equilibrium in place. It just happens to be the case, and the spatial aspects, at least as the system currently is, mean that very precise, very, very, very specific things affect the equilibrium. So the key route in Europe is between Greater London and Frankfurt, which of course passes over Belgium. And the highest point in Belgium is bet you don't know this. It's the Signal de Botrange. It's not that high by most standards, about 700 meters high. And there's a car park at the Signal de Botrange. And for Mackay Brothers to remain competitive in the London to Frankfurt route, they were struggling for years to get the permission to build a microwave tower in a bit of the car park of the Signal de Botrange. Similarly, there's an apartment building by the beach in Duinkerke. It's a minor Belgian seaside resort, and that's where the crossing of the North Sea, where the geodesic crosses the North Sea. So you want to be on the roof of this very specific, indeed, above the flat of a very particular lady who lives on the top floor of this apartment block. So success or failures in those incredibly local struggles do actually affect that very precarious equilibrium.
thank you for that little vignette there. That was fascinating. Dennis, we have a question for you from Yanis Siligakis, who has observed that you or how you described that certain algorithms or code not working in Turkish markets. And they are wondering if that's a flaw of the algorithms or a flaw in the market, whether it perhaps indicates that Turkish markets are not liquid or not efficient, etc., in comparison to American markets. And they're also wondering how these inefficiencies can be addressed by the quantitative traders in Turkey.
I think the flow is both both algorithms and the markets are at flow here, because it's a chicken and egg question in a sense, right? Even though it's a very basic algorithm, let's say, traders trade through these algorithms, and their practice of trading constitute the markets. So I don't think that we can or should separate algorithms from markets. So, but if we want to, we can say that maybe the algorithms should be improved to be faster, which is certainly Turkish markets lack. But in terms of the markets, wait, sorry, what was the question? I forgot the question.
How they can be improved in the Turkish context specifically, or how traders can address these inefficiencies.
I don't know, because I don't think that, yes, I'm sure that they will do their best to overcome these inefficiencies, because at the end they have to make profit, and those inefficiencies doesn't allow them to make profit. So they have to do something about it. But I'm not sure how or to what extent it is, first of all, their responsibility to do the correcting, and also if it is, whether it's beyond their power or not to correct these market inefficiencies. Because again, markets and algorithms are kind of entangled with each other, but they are also kind of shape each other, right? With social and political context and all of those other hopes and fears about what's gonna happen in Turkey. So it's a very, thank you for the question. It's a very complicated question. I'm sorry that I don't have a definite answer about that, but all I want to highlight or underscore is that I don't think that we should be separating algorithms from markets.
Thank you, Dennis, for that. And I'm going to ask a last question, which is for both of you, from Emmanuel Moss, who is curious about how so much of what both of you discussed relies on specific conventions that construct markets. As regulators mandate or sanction or approve new financial technologies, do either of you have a sense for how malleable the political values that underlie regulators' approach to financial technologies are? What do they respond to? What agendas are they following with respect to specific technologies? And maybe Donald, we'll have you go first, and then Dennis, and then we'll close.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a little something, by the way, that the stuff about the flat in East Dunkirk comes from a wonderful book available, unfortunately, from the viewpoint of the Anglophone world only in French, called simply Quatre comme Four by Alexandre Lemonnier. It's a fabulous detailed scholar of these things. Yeah, malleability. Very interesting question. Yeah, and of course, regulators' values are malleable. That it is affected by, in the United States, simply, sort of which party holds the presidency and so on. But what's quite interesting to notice is what's not malleable. And I feel very dumb about this. It took me something like 3 years to realize this. There's a peculiarity in how the United States regulates financial markets. That whereas every other country in the world that I know of has essentially one financial market regulator, or at least regulator of conduct in financial markets. The United States essentially has two. There's the Securities and Exchange Commission that regulates the trading of shares, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which as its name suggests, regulates the trading of futures. And it's that regulatory split that underpins the key high frequency trading signal that I talked about, the signals lead, the way that Chicago futures lead New Jersey shares. And I couldn't for years get my head around why this very unusual regulatory setup remained and still remains, and as actually another prediction, will continue to be the case in the United States. And the answer is actually staggeringly simple, but as a non-American, I didn't see it to begin with, which is to say that the Securities and Exchange Commission reports to the Senate Banking Committee, and because of futures agricultural origins of the United States, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission reports to the Senate Agriculture Committee. So the senators on the Agriculture Committee do not want to give up jurisdiction, because the biggest donors to the senators on the Agriculture Committee are not agribusiness, they are the finance sector. As far as I can tell, that is one of the few remaining areas of complete bipartisan agreement in Washington, DC. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans on the Agriculture Committee are prepared to give up jurisdiction. So that split jurisdiction is an example of what remains stable in the world of regulation. And I said that one of the things within which machine learning has to operate in financial trading is structural patterns such as futures lead. So those relatively stable aspects of the regulatory system are part of what makes high frequency trading the activity that it is.
So, I mean, economic is political and political is economic, right? They go hand in hand together. In terms of like how these political values of regulators can change or not, or to what extent they change or not, at this point, I should say that it's like basically they have to obey the president, which kind of complicates the meta-narrative about again, like for instance, the technocratic knowledge of central bank, right? Because central bank, even though it has political ties and values, it has to kind of evolve those short-term political ideologies or targets of the government. But right now, it's more about, I'm trying to be gentle here, sorry. It's more about how central bank can work for the government so that the government can sustain its hegemony. So as an answer to this question, yes, the political values of regulators are highly malleable. And again, in terms of what kind of agendas they have, okay, so the individual bankers, individual central bankers, individual economists, of course, they try to, come up with like different solutions to our debt and currency crisis. But in terms of the agenda of the central bank as an institution, again, goes in line with the agenda of the current government. So at this point, unfortunately, it is impossible to separate those different powers that have effects and that regulate the economic markets, financial markets. And unfortunately, I think I haven't encountered any kind of discussions from regulatory bodies in terms of technologies. There were like lots of discussions, especially when Turkey was hoping to be a part of the European Union. So there were like some improvements were being made, and actually most of the traders are happy and very like glad that those improvements, technological and legal and constitutional improvements were made, because they really apparently they really helped the Turkish financial markets to attract more, you know, more market actors. But at this point, I haven't seen any like news or statements or like any conversations about high frequency trading, for instance, by the regulatory bodies. I mean, there are some like discussions about moving the central bank from Ankara, the capital, to Istanbul, but I looked at, as far as I know, at least let's put it that way, as far as I know, moving is more about the buildings themselves, but not about how to improve the technological infrastructures. I might be wrong, but as far as I know, the whole discussion is based on buildings, not technologies.
Thank you, Deniz, and that's a wonderful note, you know, to end on the symbolic significance of place, which is where Donald kind of started us off a little earlier. So with that, it is my absolute pleasure and honor to thank you again for being here, Deniz Çoral and Donald Mckenzie, today for co-opting AI trade. Thank you for your terrific and very thoughtful contributions to the conversation today, for bringing your field sites and your observations and thoughts into the conversation. I very much appreciate it. I want to thank all of you who joined us today virtually for coming and sharing this space with us. I hope you will come back for more co-opting AI events in the fall 2022 programming. We will have an event on agriculture, for example, and we'll have one on the human anatomy. So stay tuned for more. You can find Donald and Deniz online. If you have more questions, you can email them. This recording will be available on the IPK YouTube channel very soon. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful, relaxing evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Take good care.